Network Automation Nerds podcast.
Hello and welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and other interesting technology topics. I'm your host, Eric Cho. Today on the show, we'll be talking to Tim Bertino. Tim is one of the hosts on the awesome The Art of Network Engineering podcast. So you might already be familiar with his voice, his sense of humor, and his technical background. He's a very awesome human being and has always been kind enough to remind all of us about the importance of blood donation. So today, we'll be talking to Tim about his, network engineering path, and then we'll go ahead and diverge into a conversation and something I feel very passionate about, and seems like Tim has a lot to say as well. So I'm very interested in his perspective about side projects, side hustles, passion projects, whatever you want to call it. And I'm super excited to have Tim on the show today, and I know we'll have a great time chatting. So welcome, Tim. Good to have you on the show finally.
Eric, thank you so much for having me on. I find that I don't tweet a whole lot, but whenever I go do the blood donation thing, that's an excuse for me to get on Twitter and say hi to you. So thanks for calling that out.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any particular reason? I'm being interested, right? Is there any particular reason for you to have this consistent blood donation pattern outside of just being kind and help others?
So that's a lot of it. I try to find ways that I can donate my time or resources, or just ways of being kind, and that is a super easy way to do that. Like, I don't have very many skills, but I am excellent at bleeding.
Yeah. You're very good at bleeding. Like, you're fast.
Very, very good. Like, I'm in and out in 5 minutes. It falls right out of me.
Oh, me too. Actually, for the consistency, I actually have like a little scar. It's almost like a little like red dot for them to like poke. So it's like, I tell them, hey, if you're new to this, don't worry about it. It's like marked for you. You don't even have to find it.
No, but my wife and I got into it. Was probably right around pandemic time. We both got into it. So we both try to go as close to every 8 weeks as possible.
Yeah. And then, I don't know about your region, but for the Pacific Northwest, where I'm at, they actually have like a small win, kind of a endorphin hit. Like they actually give you little pins whenever you get like 1 gallon, 2 gallons.
Oh, okay. Gallons. Yeah.
And then they also have like this wall of heroes. I mean, they don't call it a wall of heroes. That's what I might interpret it. But they have people who have donated like a lot, like hundreds, right? And then they have this gold leaf with their name on it. So my aspiration is to one day be on that wall.
Awesome. You're going to get there.
I don't know. I hope so. But that's a lot of bleeding. But like you said, I'm getting good at it too. Yeah, so if I mean, we were chatting just before the show. You were at a very awesome event last week. You want to tell us more about it?
Definitely. So I had the opportunity to join some of my peers at Networking Field Day in Silicon Valley last week. It was something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. I had the opportunity back in 2021, and everything was still virtual, and it was a great experience, but it was great to get to an in-person event and meet people like you and I were just talking about, the great Ethan Banks. Jordan Martin was there, getting to actually meet Tom Hollingsworth and his staff, Rita Younger, and I'm just naming some people. And of course, I can't forget AJ, my co-host on and founder of the Art of Network Engineering podcast. AJ Murray was there, Gerard Cavalinas. Sure. Again, I can't mention everybody, but it was a fantastic event. They have, you can tell that they are very seasoned at this. The delegates really didn't have to lift a finger. We got flown out to sit through these presentations from different vendors, and then we get to ask questions. So it's very different from a typical vendor pitch webinar where it's just kind of a canned presentation and you get what you get. While those can be beneficial, having people who leverage these types of technologies on a daily basis, getting to ask questions to people that present. And selfishly for me, I know that I get to, as a practitioner, I'm getting chance to talk and ask questions of somebody who is a high level up in a business unit within
Right.
a vendor. I mean,
Right.
when else are you going to get the opportunity to do that? So it was an incredible event.
Yeah, and I mean, when I'm watching the streams, I feel also like another source of energy just bouncing off ideas, right? If you were there as a customer or as a VAR, for example, you may have access to them, but it's almost like the dynamic is different than like you have a full room of experts and everybody's asking interesting questions. And as a vendor, we A10 we participate in Network Field Day a couple of times for my product, the DDoS product too. So I tell you a lot of preparation that goes into it, and the dynamic, the energy is totally cool and different.
And something else that I will say that Tom had mentioned is that they're kind of trying to find ways of how do they connect with the younger generation now, that how do they get them introduced into Network Field Day. So one piece of advice I have for people that are up and coming is definitely get involved in the communities that are out there. Definitely get involved in social media and blogging,
Yeah.
because if you're into that, you essentially quote qualify to be a networking field day, tech field day delegate, and it's been so beneficial. It's opened a lot of doors for me.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, it's a stamp of approval, right? Like it's just you always put yourself out there. And first of all, I know just from following you throughout the years, I know it probably didn't came natural for you, right? You're by nature, you're kind of you're kind of introverted, even though you're on a podcast. So it's a kind of, but tell us more about that, right? Like, was it natural for you, or was it kind of difficult?
Absolutely not. So you
I
nailed me
set you
to
up
it.
for it.
Yeah, you nailed me to a T, Eric. I have always been somebody, once I got into technology, I've always been somebody who's been very passionate about technology, but it's
Right,
been very much so kind of kept to myself,
right.
and getting more involved in networking communities like Discord, like that's on Twitter, and then the podcast. The podcast really pushed me over the edge because I have such a hard time thinking and speaking on my feet and being able to carry on conversations like this, that since I've been able to be on the Art of Network Engineering, it's really helped me grow there. So no, I would say you don't even have to be somebody who is naturally present and naturally able to speak and have those communication skills. I do think it's something that you can learn and grow.
You don't have to be Andy to
No,
to be on
and you nailed it. That guy, with as much love and respect, that guy drives me nuts with how natural just Andy is at being Andy and being really that public figure. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't checked out Art of Network Engineering, it's awesome. I would say these people are deliberately being vulnerable, which is very hard to do, right? Like you're opening yourself up. You don't know who's listening on the other end, but you're willing to put yourself out there. So definitely go check out the podcast. And I love how the community is big, but it's also small. So we always talk about like other people and like together. I've been on the show and I enjoyed the show. Whenever I could be on the live stream, I would do it. But now with school and family, it's just a bit hard to do. But I do miss being on the live stream with you guys.
No, we appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. So Tim, I mean, I know, I follow you on Twitter. I've listened to the podcast, obviously, so I know a little bit about your background. But for those that who are not as familiar, or first time listening to your background story, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into technology? Your origin story, sort of, in sort of a way.
For sure. And hopefully this will help people who are maybe having a hard time or struggling with what it is they want to do, because I'll tell you right now, I definitely didn't have it all figured out.
You and I
And
both.
I'll throw it back to high school. So
Sure.
the high school I went to, we had a computer aided drafting and design, so like an AutoCAD type
Hmm.
program. I
Hmm.
think I got into that when I was like a sophomore, and I did that from sophomore year all the way to senior year.
Hmm.
And I just kind of had this aha moment my senior year where I sat back and I kind of looked internally and I'm like, I am no good at this at all. Like I would be an absolute liability as a construction architect. I mean, so I sitting here senior year trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So I knew
Yeah.
that architecture and engineering from a construction standpoint just probably wasn't in the cards, but I really enjoyed the technology behind it. So I'm like,
Right.
okay, let's get into computers. And I started looking, and I got into a state college here in Nebraska,
Mhm.
but I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know anything about computers. So I picked computer science as a major. I mean, it's got
Sure.
computer in the name, right? It's gotta be
Naturally.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's got to be what I need to do. So I got into school and I hit the calculus and I hit the C++,
Oh
and
my God.
the stuff just wasn't clicking. Like Eric, I failed one class my entire college career, and it was
Mhm.
calculus my freshman year. So not only did it suck for me the entire year, but I had to do it again to,
For the
to get
record,
through it.
I got a bad grade in calculus too, and that kind of screw up my GPAs and all of that. So, but yeah, no, but please tell us more.
Yeah, and that was, I'm pretty sure that was it was either first or second semester. So I mean, it
Yeah.
was early on. I was starting to go, oh man, maybe this isn't the right thing. And then as an elective or part of my major, we had the Cisco Networking Academy at
Oh,
this
nice,
school. So
nice. Yeah.
I got to get into one of those classes either my first or second semester, and within that first semester, things just started clicking. I don't know if it
Nice.
was learning about the OSI model or just things made sense. And when I sat in, and I, I probably shouldn't advertise this, but being on the Network Automation Nerds podcast, but sitting in those programming classes, I had a hard time. And I don't know if it was just me not being able to grasp certain things or the fact that, we only had classes 3 days a week and I just
Mhm.
wasn't putting enough time and effort into on my own to put into
Yeah.
that. But things
Yeah.
just weren't making sense. But I sit in those network infrastructure, those Cisco NetAcad classes, and things at a high level, things just clicked and
Right.
really piqued interest. So I had this thought early on into college that, okay, I need to get into networking. And that's what I wanted to do right
Yeah.
after college. But it was tough, right? I didn't have any real world experience.
Yeah.
But one thing that I will lend a lot to my start is when I was in college, they had a help desk and
Okay.
desktop support team for the school.
Yeah.
And really all but one of the positions for the help desk was staffed by part-time workers that were students at the school. So
Mhm.
I got my hands dirty in doing help desk work, doing desktop support, printers, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually got to spend more time learning about switches and routers and a little bit of wireless and that kind of stuff. And I was hooked. So I wanted to get in to something like that right after school. But again, my experience lied more in end user computing at that point.
Yep.
So I ended up getting a job doing end user computing, desktop support type work, and eventually showed that I had interest in networking and showed that I was willing to go after certifications. And then a spot opened up on the network team, and it's been history ever since.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting because you mentioned Cisco Network Academy back in school, but it seemed like you didn't really get into the field work until years after graduation. So
Right.
how did that whole thing played out? Like, just having access to Cisco, but didn't pick it up a couple years after.
Yeah. So having access to the Cisco Networking Academy and all that in college, I think was really pivotal for me because it gave me that exposure and gave me that kind of click in my brain that says, okay, you didn't know coming out of high school into college what you really wanted to do. You just knew it was something technology related.
Right.
Now you know. So that
Right.
was a big part for me. But again, not really being able to find anything for somebody entry level outside of college, my thought process shifted to, okay, if I can't get into networking right away, let's find a company that's a good fit that is probably a mid-sized company that will provide me the opportunity that if I can get in the door in an end user computing role, that'll open that door eventually for me to get into networking. And
We will pause the programming with a special sponsor message from me, your host, Eric. Hey guys, when it comes to network automation, have you thought about joining a group of like-minded people to ask questions and get the support you need? I would like to invite you to the Network Automation Learning Community. It is free to join and a low-pressure, safe place to post questions, get answers, and just hang out. You can sign up at members.networkautomation.community. The link is also in the show notes. Now, back to regular programming.
I'll tell you, at the company that I've been at one company since I walked out of the door at college, from college 12 years ago. I've had good leadership that has helped me the entire way. And that's something we talk about on Art of Network Engineering all the time. If you're lucky enough to be able to kind of have your pick of positions and roles, definitely lean into and ask questions about, try to find out what that culture is at whatever organization you're looking to get into, because it's really important to your happiness and your quality of life. Because having a good paying job is great, but if you don't enjoy it and you don't enjoy where you're working, it's going to mess with you mentally, I think. So I've had good leadership. I had a director early on that would meet with the individual contributors and really see where they wanted to go, what they wanted to be when they grew up. And I said, well, I want to get into networking. And he had a great response to that. He said something along the lines of, well, what are you doing to position yourself to be able to do that? I said, well, I'm working toward some Cisco certifications. I was working at the time toward the ICND1 or the CCENT. And he asked, how far along are you? I said, I hope to have it here pretty soon. He says, well, come back to me when you've got it. Yeah. So that was just some more motivation to get through that. And then I got through the CCENT, talked to him again, and they ended up expanding the network team and opened up a role for me. So I think that's a piece of it. If I can lend a piece of advice, is to really show that you have initiative and go out and look for stuff versus just waiting for things to come to you.
Yeah, let's double click on that a little bit. So I think what you said was, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm paraphrasing, but what you said was you prioritize culture and you prioritize the team over, perhaps the position that you're actually looking for. Because I've talked to young people all the time too. And what they sometimes say to me is, I want this position, right? Like, this is not the path I'm going down, or, perhaps even in a little bit sense of this is below me, like a support role or whatnot. And then they rather go do something else where they wait it out or whatnot, which is okay. But in your case, you actually prioritize a team culture and good leadership over, maybe it's not the position yet you ultimately want, you're currently want to do.
I think first off, I'll say I need to caveat that I have been incredibly lucky in everything in my career. I've been so fortunate to really fall into these really good situations. Now, granted, there's a lot of hard work involved too. Yeah. But I have been really lucky that I haven't in the past had to really go out and try to find good culture. I think it would be very hard to be in a position where you need to make that decision. Luckily, I haven't really been there too hard yet. But yeah, culture is a big piece of it. Now, I know we could probably have a really long debate because I just mentioned that I've been with this one company for 12 and a half years now. Yeah. We could probably have this debate on, should you stay or should you go? Yeah. You see a lot of people that say, you should really be trying to jump into something else just to better your career, both career-wise and financially, every 2 to 3 years or whatever number around there. Now, I've been with the same company, but I have held different roles over time. So I think that there may be something there.
Mhm.
Now I'm not changing companies, changing culture, but I am putting myself in different positions. So I'm kind of positioning myself a little bit that way. So I'm not just doing the same thing day in and day out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the company should be nameless that, that I'm about to reference to, but I met people who were there, say 10 years, but it's just the same year repeated 10 times.
Right.
And at the same time, I met people who were there for 5 years, but they've challenged themselves into different ways and sometimes even dramatically. And I will use myself as an example, right? So throughout the time that I was at Amazon, it was 4 years, but I was with, telecom, I was with network infrastructure, I was even with business development. I wasn't a very good person to be in business development, but they gave me the opportunity and then learned new stuff from it. And I quickly find out that I wasn't very good at it and I moved on. But at the same time, it gave me a kind of exposure, like you said. You open yourself up for different exposure, and I think that's super important. The exposure
So
part.
I kind of want to, I agree with you. And I
Yeah.
want to dig into that. When you have taken different roles, both at different companies and within the same company, what has been really that trigger for you to say that personally that you feel like you need to try something new or you need to move on, either just position within the company or to a different company?
Um, I think each time is a little bit different.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah. So sometimes, so I knew initially, when you enter a company, or in my case, I felt like I took a step down just because it was a bigger company that I was entering into. So, what they said was, you come in, we'll train you, and you eventually grow up into the position that you're at right now, title wise, and maybe salary wise too. So that was the initial motivation to move, is to move into, what the role that I felt like I was qualified for. And then, then it's the step up, right? You're always trying to do improvement. So you want to open up your scope. And then sometimes, it's, I've always interested in IP telephony. And that was the time when, that was a very large scale IP telephony projects that moved into telecom. And I never tried business development. So I think each time the reason is a little bit different. But what about you, Tim? Like what will be your trigger?
Oh, that's a good question.
That was your
I,
question, so I've
I
just turned it back to you. It's a great
yeah, you
question.
just turned it right back to me. I've
Answer a
always
question
kind
with a
of
question.
I've always kind of had this unwritten rule with myself that
Yeah,
whenever if I ever get to the point where getting up in the morning to do my job feels like a chore or
yeah,
feels like it's just taxing to me every day and I don't feel like I enjoy it, then
yeah,
that's the time to really go looking elsewhere. And again, back to the culture at my current employer, the few times that I've felt that way,
yeah,
I found that you be open and honest, and if you're making an impact at an organization and you're a valued employee, your employer is going to take care of you, and that's happened for me multiple times, and that's
yeah.
ultimately what's gotten me to stay put at that organization.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't say that for many different companies, right? So a lot of
Right.
times, you have to take that into your own hands. But it's really encouraging to hear your side, where if there are companies out there that prioritize professional growth and accommodating value you as an individual contributor.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up professional growth because that's a huge thing too. If you can find an organization that will invest in you in more than just a paycheck, that's a good company to work for. Somebody that if you're in an interview and you ask about a training budget and
Yeah.
they have an answer and they have a number, that's probably a good sign.
Yeah, I think that's a good, because a lot of stuff that are hard to quantify into salary, right? Like their
Yes.
roles within the network engineering field, like it's what I have in mind is the high velocity trading companies. They're roles that have super high salary, but it's not something I would ever take because of the stress level, because of the culture, because of all the I should say a little bit about negativity that I've heard of and so on. But not to single them out, right? Here's just what my single person's opinion. So I'm glad you brought that up about these non-monetary qualities of a job. And I wonder if there's like a way to qualify it, like a good coaches equate to like 20,000 a year or something like that. That would be
I
great.
think you just came up with your next automation project, Eric.
Yeah.
You come up with that career value calculator. I think you might be onto something.
Or just justify. I mean, when I talk to, so I have this. I'm trying to build this community, network automation learning community, and when people join, I actually a lot of times I try to talk to them and see what their frustration about, what's their, what's the biggest problem that they're facing, and see if we could solve that. And I think a very consistent theme is what you said, Tim, that establishing the culture and how to justify a automation project, for example, without like into monitoring terms, right? What's your payback period? What's like discounted cash flow or time value of money, all these other awesome stuff that the business people speak, but us network engineer might not, use it on a daily basis. So so that is one of the things that I think if we could qualify it, that would be great.
Yeah. And another thing around network engineers is that I wanted to highlight was that I think network engineers really need to give ourselves some credit. I think I think from an IT standpoint, I think we're in a very good position because having networking knowledge really, I mean, the network, we say it for years, it's the highway or it's the plumbing of all other things IT. You need networking in place.
Right.
And to have that knowledge. And another thing is I've noticed being in the network engineering field is that the network team gets pulled into a lot of different projects.
Exactly.
Just because project managers and stakeholders, they need to make sure that different components of the network are in place. And sometimes if they don't know, they just like to have individuals from the network team involved so they can ask questions, so they can understand what's going on. So as networking professionals, you quickly indirectly pick up knowledge from different facets of IT, different facets of the business. So as network engineers, network admins, network architects, I feel like we're in a really good position to, when you get to that point where maybe you want to try something different, you want to get into security, you want to get into cloud, I think you really have a step up because you've got that base networking knowledge. So I definitely, if you're in the networking field, I'm biased, but give yourself a pat on the back and know that if you do want to jump into something else, I think you've got a good chance to do so.
Yeah, for sure. So like for a lot of projects we're tiered 0, like, if we're expanding to, a new area, right? So there's always the tiered 0 services that every other service that built on top of it. So infrastructure, servers, networks, data center, real estate, power, cooling, all these other stuff are just tier 0. So I think you're right about you have a lot of exposure. So I've seen people who move down the stack. I mean, down the stack, meaning going to the physical layer, right? They become a really sophisticated optical engineer, or, they can move up the stack where they become a security expert, or, go into web development or whatnot. So it is really like this hourglass midsection, right? Everything converges into there. And then it's up to you to say where you want to take your career next. So that's super awesome that you brought it up.
Yeah. And I'm glad you touched on this because I got some really good advice. I think towards the end of 2021 from Yvonne Sharp, who's now at Google, she said that you get to a point in your career where if you're somebody who's conscious about continuing to develop yourself, you get to this point where you can either go deep or go wide. So to take that a step further, you can either get kind of a narrow focus on a given facet of a given technology and just go nuts, become an expert, or you can go more broad and learn more about adjacent technologies and be that person in the organization that can kind of tie different things together. You're not necessarily um, incredibly skilled at any one given thing, but you can be pulled into many different things and be able to help out. And really, I kind of had that internal discussion with myself at
Yeah.
that time and said, I think I'm more of a go wide person. And that's where I really kind of went all in on trying to become a network or a systems architect.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, she's obviously very knowledgeable, very sharp lady, no pun
Hey, I
intended.
like it.
But yeah, so we talked about like a T-shape professional, right? You go pretty wide and then you have this one field where you specialize in. More recently, I also heard from this serial entrepreneur who talk about like an M shape. So you go deep into several different fields, and at the same time, you still keep your base pretty wide and so on.
I don't think
But
I have that level of attention span to be
yeah,
able
I
to
was
do that,
tired.
Eric.
I was tired just by listening to that. It's like, oh
Yeah,
my
I
god,
think
you're
I
saying.
would be there too.
I feel so exhausted. Just that, but he's a serial entrepreneur, so his energy level is always high,
Yeah.
and kudos to him. But you mentioned you're a system architect now, right? And you're in the healthcare industry. So
Yes.
what kind of as a system architect, what's your day to day like, and what kind of tech stack do you use?
So the day to day, I will say, depends on the day. So
Monday versus Friday.
yeah. So I think right now I'm still kind of trying to find the balance between engineering and architecture.
Got it.
And it's pretty good for me still because I do, to an extent, there are certain things where I still enjoy the hands-on and being able to skill up. But a big reason why I wanted to go the architecture path is I wanted to start, like we were talking about going wide
Yep.
from a skill set perspective. I wanted to start trying to become a little more business minded and see where IT can provide more value to the business, because I think we've talked about it before in that IT departments can easily be seen as a cost center, and
Yes.
that's pretty much it. You're there to
So is
keep the
support.
lights
Yeah.
on. Yeah, you're there to support, you're there to keep the lights on. All you're really doing is costing the business money, but you're enabling technology, right?
Hmm.
So I wanted to be in a position where I could try to take that a step further.
Yeah.
Whereas rather than just keeping the lights on, what can we do as an IT department to innovate and not only just keep the lights on, but make the business better? So I wanted to be in a role where I could kind of be that go between, or be
Yeah.
that translator between the business and IT. And that's what I'm kind of trying to fall into right now. And I think it's going well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we all need to learn to speak business. We all need to, kind of justify the value we're bringing in. And there's no better way to do that than to just be your own cost center. Like, even treat yourself as an entrepreneur, as a intrapreneur, right? Like, you're innovating within the
Hmm.
company, within your role, and you put your balance sheet on what are my assets and what are my liabilities and what's my equity, as well as you're putting yourself into your profit and loss, right? This is how much money I can attribute to my action, and here's how much the company is costing, like training, whatever that's they're costing to do that. And then at the end of the day, if that is a positive number, then you feel pretty good. And then you go, if it's a negative number, then you try to think about what are some of the assets I could gain, what are some of the profits I could bring to the company. That's a brilliant way to look at it, Tim.
I've never really thought of it that way. I liked it because I have a very logical mind, and I try to use statistics and numbers to back things up. So
Yeah.
I've never really thought of it that way, but I like that. And I will say, to add on to that, I was so early on in my career, not that I'm terribly much better now, but I was so ignorant when it came to the business side of things. Like, I had this in-depth mindset that, yes, I'm working in healthcare, but I'm hired as an IT professional.
Right.
All I need to know is the ones and zeros, how things connect. I don't need to know anything about what they're doing over there.
Hmm.
And as I've grown over the years, I've come to understand how wrong I was
Mhm.
because it's back to that focus of, if all I'm focusing on is the tech and just making sure the bits and bytes go across the wire, yes, I'm keeping the lights on, but that's about all I'm doing. I'm not enabling the business to innovate and be better because I'm not learning about them.
Yeah.
I'm just learning at what I'm just doing what I need to do to get my job done. So that's where I'm kind of trying to take that step further and see, okay, what is the business? What are they really doing? What are they trying to do? And become more proactive at helping them achieve those goals.
That's awesome. Yeah, once again, I think that's very valuable for all of us to do, is to kind of be the bridge in between. I like how you're approaching it. Well, this is probably a good way to wrap up our part one of our interview. Well, thanks for listening to the Network Automation Nerds podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other podcast platforms. Don't forget to tune in next week. We'll listen to part two, and we'll dive into more of the business background, and as well as some of the passion projects that Tim has in place. So, yeah, tune in next week.